And welcome back to Adobe Developers Live Content and Commerce. I am with Cristian Partica, and he's going to be talking about disparate APIs and the unified experience, the API mesh way. Christian, take it away.
Thank you. Welcome to API Mesh presentation. My name is Cristian Partica. I'm a senior product manager for API Mesh. In case you didn't know it, you see me on that presentations, but I'm here to show you what API Mesh can do and why this product makes it great for your development purposes. And let's dive into it. So API Mesh is an orchestration layer, part of App Builder. That's what you should know. If you never interacted with it, uh, you can use it for eliminating point to point integrations. Before you used to connect your APIs with different consumers, front ends, etc. Now you can put all your API together in one single GraphQL unified API, and you can orchestrate different sources of API separately and all into App Builder, integrated with Commerce, integrated with your AP, integrated with your CRM, etc. So we provide this product out of the box, part of App Builder, and it comes with the license if you have an Adobe Commerce license or AEM, etc. So I encourage you to give it a shot. So I'm going to explain today from something that's more of a high level. How do you get access to it? How do you use it to a use case that is pretty complicated? And I'm gonna build some steps over it, so you know you build confidence that I don't get you lost or anything. But this is meant to be simple, right? But it does solve complex use cases, so that's exactly what I'm going to show you today. So in a different point of view of how this point to point integrations is that different systems before used to integrate with each other directly, right? We don't want to do that, and we want to separate front end integrations as headless commerce, for example, from backend integrations. There's APIs that don't doesn't belong in the front end, and there is front end API that doesn't belong in the back end, right? So we want to separate those two. And before we used to draw all these lines, right, between systems, that's brittle. And I think that has been explained before. And App Builder, especially API Mesh, it's meant to actually bring your API together and orchestrate and route them accordingly. So you don't have end-to-end relations between your systems, right? You want to have as little lines connections as possible. And also consume an API that it's uh, very flexible. And this is why we chose API Mesh. API Mesh chose GraphQL for it. Right. So you can choose what part of the API you select and deliver and eliminate data fetching overhead with it. All right. Today's agenda, it's simple. I'm going to show you how to organize your application into developer console, make use of App Builder. Probably you have seen this before. I'm going to show you exactly where to find API mesh in case you didn't find it, right? And then we're going to dive into a visual demo plus a little bit of system diagram. Maybe I'm going to show you a little bit of code if you have the patience to stay with me until the end of this presentation. We only have about 20 minutes, so, and I'm going to want to respond some questions that you might have. All right. So how do you organize your things, right? Your organization is being provisioned with with developer console login, right? So here you can organize in projects. Let's say you have a project like you have a web app and you have like a native app, for example, and they have a kiosk or some integration between two systems. You want to keep those in projects, but then you want to give developers access to the projects that they would need to, and then developer console uh, allows you to invite every developer to your organization that you might need, and then you can revoke those access, and then you want to for every workspace that you have. Um, which is part of a project, you want to have like a production and stage for every stage of your development lifecycle. And then on the last part here, we're showing where everything comes together. So API Mesh is actually part of your workspace, right? And I've added it here, but I also added commerce eventing. I also added like IO runtime. I also added other things that I need for my application to come together, right? It's not only about API, it's about also backend integrations, which comes pretty out of the box with App Builder. You don't have to pay for it. So that's pretty nice and is wired together. So that's what I'm going to show you today, how everything actually comes together, how everything communicates, and you can finally surface your data that you only want to the front end, so it be consumed, and you actually can modify its behavior accordingly. So where do you find the API mesh? When you are in the workspace, you add an API like so, and we provide like a registry of different APIs that you have access to. So API mesh is part of it. You also have other APIs is available like Journey Optimizer. And from here, you can add also IO events, etc. So that's how you have access to it. And then once you deploy it, and for deployment, you need like IO CLI. And at the end, I will provide some resources of where you can find those things and how can you get started with them. That's not the purpose of the this presentation. But once you deploy it, right, what's important to know that it will create a custom URL, like so. And this custom URL, you must switch it for your front end or for your consumer. So it only interacts with it. That's the unification part. While everything else gets wired in the background and we only modify data into the API mesh as opposed to the point to point ones, right? So it simplifies a lot your communication. It lets API mesh handle the complexity. We also provide some other things which are very interesting. As I said, everything comes together in this developer portal, so you have access to some statistics. For example, how many APIs did I do over a period of time? Now, this has a little bit of delay, but eventually, your API calls and your statistics are going to be um, actually in this page, right? So I encourage you to see the statistics page. I can see like I have some events delivered. I have some API calls, and today I haven't really done anything, but over the weekend I worked on this presentation. So you can see a bit of spike here. So that's very handy for some business user that wants to see how their application performs, etc., and how many API calls did their application actually cause. We do have um, a fair usage amount of them, but you know there is a rate limiting and there is a fair use fair user limiting cap on the how much APIs you want to do, and we don't want to get more in details, but we hope you never reach that, and it's part of your license. Okay, common use cases for API mesh. You really can use it for three main things that I think about, though this have a lot of implication and ramifications of how complex you would actually want it to be, right? So I only went into how you can serve a unified API. And serving your unified API actually, you bring different sources together like REST, like SOAP, like maybe some GraphQL, and it puts it together, it stitches it, and it serves it to the front end with your to backend integration. Now, for you can modify that API behavior without touching the underlying API. For example, if Adobe Commerce give some pricing out of the box, you can modify that pricing calculation or price display or anything without touching commerce. And that's very important. And App Builder provides you the tools through JavaScript, through other functions, serverless functions that get deployed and they get invoked and it does those calculations. That's also provided by your license, right? You don't have to deploy to your cloud. You don't have to do all the wiring. It's all in the same ecosystem, right? So it has low latency it's optimized for speed, right? And it's also about transforming your API, right? Sometimes the API that you take from a ERP or from some third party does not work like you want it to. So you want to do a transformation or an adaptation. A common use case is that for the front end, you want to keep the same API. For the back end, you want to modify that API, and it has two life cycles. And your front end developers don't really care about what's going on under. They just want the data. They just want to interact with data. They want data that requires less as processing or nothing. And that's why we have Adobe IO runtime. That's why we have custom resolvers, for example, for API mesh, where you can build some authentication or pre-build. We call this before all hooks that that can, before you access the data, it does some pre-checks if you're authorized, if you're in the right context before you actually access that data. So it has some access level controls, which enhances your API, right? Uh, as it comes out of the box, so you don't have to modify. Often you can't, right? You're working with some legacy API, or you're working with some vendor. If you're working with Adobe Commerce, of course, you have the luxury of modifying the API in place, but we don't recommend that. We recommend that you distribute for your customization, and you deploy, you provision and deploy to app builder, and you done this out of process. Okay, so for unified endpoints, right? This is how it looks. Really, API mesh functions as unified endpoint, but also functions as an API gateway. It provides other things than just transformation of API and unifying API. It also enhances with security, so you can customize your rate limiting, for example. You can have a WAF on top of it. You can, and all of this is actually built in, and we have the means to do so. And you can create a lot of backend for front end, for example, according to your app. So I mentioned, like, maybe you have a kiosk, you have a web app, and you have a application. That's like three meshes that you can create. Or because you use GraphQL, you just create one and you select the fields um, that you want because they're optimized for it, right? So as features wise, we have regular GraphQL, right? You can also put REST. If it has open API, then it will be automatically converted to uh, GraphQL. You don't have to really do anything for that, and that's amazing, right? Before you used to spend what, like a week just doing that. Now we just spin up a configuration, deploy it, provision and deploy it, and then in seconds you have that. We also added SOAP. We understand that there's legacy systems out there. They still use SOAP. It's a little bit verbose, but we had that demands that's available right now. And the interesting part is this JSON schema. This is where your customizations are actually really, really living in API Mesh, because you can define your schema with JSON, and it can grab from any source as long as is exposed to the web, right? That's very important because um, usually it's either a get or post that you work with, you can parameterize it. And that's what I actually scope for today's demo. Um, right. So going further, I'm going to do a little bit of visual demo, but I wanted to just show you a little bit what am I going to exemplify here, because it's a bit, complicated. You have a PWA or front end that wants to render through API, just through API, different parts of your store, right? So you have here an image, you have here like a title, you have here a price, right? But you have a discount that comes from a different source, maybe a different ERP, I don't know. And then you have an inventory, which it's also like a different system. So you have all these three systems, and they have different APIs. One is RESTful, the second one is RESTful, and this is a GraphQL. You don't just do this to point to point. You want to use API mesh for this, right? But um, Commerce has a discount. So what do we do in that case? Do we override the discount, or we don't join it together? Do we back end integrate it? Do we front end integrate it? and that's really the question here. And API mesh allows you, along with runtime, to do front integrations directly or even backend integrations, right? And backend integrations are preferable because in this case, through eventing, you get notified about changes, about product changes. They get eventing, and it can pre-calculate like an index your API instead of doing it on the front end directly through custom resolvers and do a lot of computing. So computers is okay for that purpose if you just have to do like some simple math functions. But if you're like in real time grabbing a lot of API and you want to do a lot of computing and your custom resolvers that you're doing for example, this uh, discount is going to take a lot of time. We recommend that you do this with async eventing and you just pre-calculate your things in the background. And my example, which I put it on GitHub, by the way, shows both ways. One that does a lot of computing on the front end, and that's possible. Adequate inside cases, right, where you don't have a choice, and the eventual consistency or something that you get notified for the backend integration, which is the second choice. All right. So we want an API like this, right? We want um, some discounted price. We want um, the percentage amount. We have the original price here, and we have some inventory stuff, all in the same API, right? This is what the end result that we want. So before this used to be possible, before API mesh, our API was like this, right? The original one contained just the commerce discount. It did calculate the final price, right? But it had no idea about the ARP1 and the ARP2. So how do we make them actually work together, right? We need this integration, right? Um, so, for example, and we're just going to focus, for example, on the calculation of prices. We want to take out the discount and the final price, and we want to replace this with like some new fields. Or we can put this in place here, but and that's desirable because you don't have to modify your PWA in that case, right? But I chose this to add new discounted prices. See, I eliminated from here what was old. This is the new, right? Strike off. And it all binds by SKU. If you see, like I highlighted here, SKU, that's our counter variable for our integration. And we want to do some interesting things and see it in action, right? So to see it in action, let's see, I prepared here a PWA. It's just a simple React app. That's not my focus for the presentation today, but um, I do want to see it in action, right? So what we want to see is something like this. We want to see a product rendering, and it's going to have some out of the box, as it comes from commerce discounts. We can see here the query, right? So we added here a discounted price, inventory, everything in the same place. If we would have done this before, what this used to look like, right? This used to look like this. So we had discount here, we had final price, and none of this was actually in place, right? So this is what we've done, which is exactly what I showed you there. And we can deep dive a little bit into our use case here. All right. You can also test this into our API mesh. So we can see it here. I deployed already an API mesh. I can actually see it working in practice, right? So it actually combines what was before with the discounts with the new discount that I have in a database, and it calculates here with a index the final price, right? So it eliminates, of course, the old discounts and it does the new discounts here. So um, how did I do this? Right? That's the question. Like it's pretty simple. It looks simple. It is desirable. It is what your front end developers will ask for. Hey, give me an API that can calculate these prices by combining different systems together. Okay. Well, let's see how I did it. So going back to my presentation, there's a system diagram here, which is fairly interesting. This is how it all works. It will use a JSON schema, right? I have an Adobe Commerce done here, which communicates with my eventing, which I deployed a runtime action. The runtime action actually receives the eventing. It also does an API call back to Commerce, which I haven't put in the diagram. It gets that API call because the events is just a simple payload. It's like, this is the SKU. If you remember, I highlighted the SKU there, and something has changed on that SKU. So react to that event. Okay. Once I get almost the same information that I had on the GraphQL, because I'm using still GraphQL to grab all the information about the original discount, I have here another key value pair storage. Let's say I give my, you know, my sales team some applications which are also done in React, which they only interact with discounts. They don't want anything else, but just put those discounts in. You know, they have to be reflected in the front end integrated directly. So they put those discounts, but this discount integrates those together into a runtime function and delivers that to the API mesh, which delivers it to the front user. So it uses pre-calculated stuff, or it can just calculate a percentage. That there's not a crazy amount of computation. So it also will do like an inventory, right? An inventory can do the same thing. I didn't integrate in this case the inventory, but you can do the same thing. You can have a different thing that interacts with your RESTful exposed API, which you've done to runtime. And finally, through custom resolvers, you interact with it. And just to show where did I put those documentation of how you can do that, and also where did I put the code that allows me to do all of that. It's here, right? And I'm gonna leave this for a minute or two. Well, this is recorded as well, but maybe you can take a screenshot if you're a developer, if you're interested of how you can combine. And this has been a popular ask for our users, how you can combine API mesh, eventing, runtime, commerce. This is it, right? This is all what you need, and also how you can do persistence for your index prices or computation if you need to. This actually makes use of it, right? So if you have done a screenshot of that, I would like to actually show a little bit how the code looks like. I'm just gonna spend a minute or two for that. Um, so in our API mesh, we really have three sources. We have commerce, we have this inventory new API, and we have the discounts, and they are literally resolving through two JavaScript codes, which is fairly simple. That's it. Resolve, resolve. And what that is doing, it's actually resolving into this. Let me show you. It just puts the calculated price into this discount percentage discounted price, and you can use React then to just listens for it. So it sees, okay, this is a configurable product. Good. Does it have a discount? Well, if discounted percentage is 0, then no. If it is, then strike out, put something like this. For example, this doesn't have any, the other one does. And if you want to see like how the data is, it's here, right? Um, but if you're a developer, that may be interesting for you. If you're not a developer, that will be not at all interesting for you. But just so you know, I wanted to show to your developers that this is possible, and please check this code out. I think it's amazing. It uses a custom PWA, which simplifies a lot. How can you modify your PWA? It didn't take me a lot of effort. I think it took me maybe 10 minutes of changing, you know, this query from the old query, uh, doing some React code here and if and else. That's it. I was able to change everything to adaptation of my new API. The big complexity here usually is in the backend layer, right? And just to show you how complex it is, right? Um, I didn't show you the higher runtime, but that's a little bit more code than this. And I tried to put like one-to-one mapping for code because this counter price here is from commerce. This counter price here is from runtime function. That actually is computing the discounted price for me, and I'm not computing it here. I could have just taken my commerce API, do some math, do it like here as well. But I didn't want to do that. And there is another commit in the GitHub repo, which is here, that actually shows. All right. So in the interest of time, I am going to do some questions and answers.
Okay. I'm checking with our external moderator. It doesn't seem anything was posted, but I do have two of my own.
Okay.
Um, you did mention that we do have some analytics at our disposal, but you said there's a delay. Are you talking like a couple of hours or a couple of minutes?
A couple of hours, and there's a reason for that. And we're improving it. We understand that you need real time um, statistics, but more of a you need real time logging rather than metrics. Like
Right.
I can live probably with a few hours of delayed how many.
API calls?
Yeah.
Or-
But if I'm a developer, I need real time statistics and logging so I can troubleshoot.
Right.
Right. But in order to compensate for that, until we fix this problem, logging actually costs a lot. So that's why
Mhm.
we delayed it a little bit. And it bloats out the systems is the reason for why we didn't do it real time. We put out a feature which is called local dev server. So for example, if you want to rely on like deploying to the server and get the logs as a troubleshooting method, right? That's not the way. Use like a local dev server, use VS Code. You can actually deploy on your local API mesh. You can put a debug point and voila, you don't need any logging. It's like now you're a real developer, right? You don't
Right.
interact with the cloud, you interact with the tools that you're accustomed with. And then once it works, you can deploy it. It will ensure that the same code actually works on the provisioning.
Nice.
Mm.
And then the other one, I just wanted to make sure I was completely clear on this. Because you put your backend integrations behind API mesh, if for some reason you swap something out, like your pricing engine, it sounds like the front end is completely untouched because you're taking that data and figuring it out in the back end, which should mean if you do swap out your back end for whatever reason, any of those components, it actually sounds fairly painless for the front end. So
Yes.
rather than doing it like we used to do in PHP code, it seems like this is a lot less work in the end.
Yes, exactly. And that's the true meaning of having separate teams do what they do better, right? Front end developers don't want their contract touched. That's API,
Right.
right? So you better keep that contract. What I've done in the example that I changed the API, I added two fields. Probably you don't want to do that. Probably you want to just put a resolver to the old fields. That's
Right.
also possible, right? It both way work. Check with your front end developers how easy it is for them to change because sometimes it's a piece of cake and it
Right.
might work in place for you to not do that. So always, keep those contracts in check and see what takes the least effort, right?
Yeah.
The tools are there.
So I know that you and I've been working on this particular topic now for about 8 or 9 months, maybe even longer now. Was there anything that you remember from the very beginning that you were kind of unsure of that you kind of solidified over these last couple of months? Because I remember when I first went through it, my biggest thing was the resolvers. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. But was there any topics that you remember struggling with in the beginning that just because of persistence and just using it that you learned and now you find is actually one of the easier sides?
Yeah. So I find that I want to do as less of a work in the resolvers because they can get quite complex. And I wasn't sure of their SDK, like what supported, was not supported. Definitely like doing remote calls directly in the resolvers was something that I struggle with. And now since I offset that to the IO runtime, which is exactly the example that I showed you here, that simplified a lot of stuff for me. Like do math calculations in the resolver, don't do remote calls in I think that was the easiest thing that is a takeoff for me.
That is great.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see any more questions trickling in. And so with that, we will kick everybody out. I think they probably want to go over to the live hands-on session if they're not already.
Sure.
Christian, thank you very much. I wanted to remind everybody that there is the APAC sessions starting next week. So if you're interested, and this was a little bit too late in the day for you, feel free to look at that and attend those. And Christian, have a great day, and we'll talk to everybody soon.